Trucks stretch for miles at the U.S.-Canada border, engines rumbling in the summer heat. Stacks of paperwork grow taller by the hour, as drivers wait for clearance that never seems to come. So what's really happening here? Has Canada just passed a sweeping new agricultural import law? Or is this a case of tightening the screws on rules that have been in place for years? Here's the truth. There hasn't been a brand new law in the past 90 days. The Safe Food for Canadians regulations, or SFCR, are still the framework in force. But on July 4, 2025, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency quietly announced tougher inspections for licensed food importers. That shift in enforcement is already rippling across America's Farm Belt, and for producers who depend on a steady flow across the northern border, the stakes have never been higher. SFCR in 90 seconds. 3 pillars, real-world impact. First, licensing. Every importer must hold valid permits and, in some cases, product-specific certificates before goods can cross the border. Second, preventive controls. Strict safety standards, pesticide residue limits, and contamination checks, often verified through costly lab testing. Third, traceability. Complete documentation tracking every step from farm to processor to exporter, ensuring full transparency if a problem arises. These rules are what trade experts call non-tariff barriers. They don't raise taxes like tariffs, but they drive up compliance costs and slow down shipments. And when your market is as big as Canada, buying about $29.51 billion in U.S. agricultural products in 2024, roughly 16.7% of all American farm exports. Every extra day and every extra dollar matters. Number 7. Wisconsin. Wisconsin, proudly known as America's Dairyland, has built a global reputation for its cheese, butter, and powdered milk. For decades, Canada has been a top customer, buying products that now make up about 14% of Wisconsin's total dairy export value. That strong partnership is under strain from 2 major pressures. First, under the USMCA trade agreement, dairy tariff rate quotas (TRQs) strictly limit how much U.S. dairy can enter Canada before steep tariffs take effect. Even when Canadian buyers want more, these quotas create a hard ceiling that blocks additional sales. Second, the Safe Food for Canadians regulations demand extensive traceability documentation for every shipment. From the exact farm where the milk originated, through processing plants, to the exporter's dock, each step must be fully recorded and verified. Any missing information or failed inspection can delay a shipment for weeks or force it back entirely. Those delays raise storage costs, put perishable products at risk, and strain cash flow for farmers. Some Canadian contracts have already been reduced or cancelled, cutting into reliable revenue streams. As farm gate prices sink below break-even levels, Wisconsin's dairy sector faces mounting financial pressure. What was once a stable cross-border market is quickly becoming a challenging, uncertain road for America's dairy heartland. Number 6. Iowa, the beating heart of America's Corn Belt, is one of the largest producers of corn and soybeans in the world. For years, Canada has been a reliable and profitable buyer, using Iowa's grain to supply food processors, livestock feeders, and export facilities. But under the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, every shipment now faces an intense level of scrutiny. Exporters must provide precise details on seed origin, pesticide applications, and every step of post-harvest handling before the grain can cross the border. This means more lab testing, more certification paperwork, and higher compliance fees. For farmers and exporters already operating on tight margins, these added costs are cutting directly into profits. When documentation is incomplete or testing is delayed, trucks and rail cars sit idle at elevators or border checkpoints, racking up storage and demurrage charges. The slowdown creates a domino effect. Grain piles up in storage, local prices fall, and some producers are forced to sell below cost just to make room for the next harvest. Processing plants, which depend on constant deliveries, have been forced to reduce operating hours or cut shifts. For Iowa, where agriculture is not just an industry, but a way of life, these documentation drags aren't simply red tape. They're a growing threat to the state's economic stability and its long-standing role as a trusted supplier to the Canadian market. Number 5. Illinois. Illinois is a powerhouse in agricultural processing, turning massive volumes of corn and soybeans into ethanol, soybean oil, and high-quality animal feed. For decades, Canada has been a critical customer, benefiting from Illinois' proximity and tightly integrated supply chains under the USMCA agreement. But in the current climate, the Safe Food for Canadians regulations are creating a new set of hurdles. Every shipment must now prove that its raw materials meet Canadian safety and traceability standards, down to the origin of each batch of grain used in production. This requires meticulous record-keeping, laboratory testing, and, in many cases, third-party inspections before the product can even leave the plant. When these certifications arrive late or fail to meet the exact requirements, delivery schedules collapse. A delay in paperwork can quickly translate into missed deadlines, triggering penalty clauses in contracts or losing valuable shelf space in Canadian markets. Some processing facilities in Illinois have been forced to reduce operating capacity to avoid stockpiling unsellable goods. Others have cut shifts or moved workers to part-time schedules in response to unpredictable export flow. In a sector where reliability is everything, even a short disruption can damage long-standing client relationships. For Illinois, the trust gap caused by delayed documentation is more than an administrative setback. It threatens the state's hard-earned reputation as one of North America's most dependable suppliers. Number 4. Minnesota. Minnesota is one of America's leading producers of wheat and soybeans, with much of its harvest moving north to Canadian buyers. The state's export system relies heavily on a finely tuned network of rail lines and trucking routes, where timing is everything. Under the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, each shipment now requires additional quality certifications before it can cross the border. This means laboratory testing, documentation reviews, and inspection approvals that can add several days to the shipping schedule. In a just-in-time supply chain, even a delay of 24 to 48 hours can trigger costly penalty fees under contract terms. Faced with the risk of late arrivals, some exporters are choosing to redirect shipments to alternative markets, even if those deals are less profitable. Others are holding product in storage for extended periods, which increases costs and raises the risk of quality deterioration. These delays and diversions disrupt cash flow for farm operators who depend on timely payments to cover operating expenses and prepare for the next planting season. The impact ripples outward. Grain elevators, transport companies, and small rural businesses all feel the strain when export schedules falter. For Minnesota, whose competitive edge in the North American market rests on its ability to deliver reliably by rail, the mounting logistical friction is not just an inconvenience. It's a direct threat to its role as a trusted supplier to Canada. Number 3. Nebraska. Nebraska is a rare dual force in American agriculture, ranking among the top producers of both premium beef and high-quality grain. For years, Canada has been a dependable market for both sectors, importing prime beef cuts along with corn and wheat for food processing and animal feed. Now, that balanced export mix is under significant stress. For beef producers, The Safe Food for Canadians regulations require strict quarantine protocols and full traceability from ranch to processing plant to exporter. Every animal must be documented and verified at each stage, adding layers of inspections and extending the time before shipments can clear the border. For grain exporters, the demands are equally heavy. Detailed records of seed sources, pesticide applications, and handling practices must be prepared and certified. These requirements increase administrative costs and often delay shipments, leaving products in storage for longer periods. In the beef sector, slower market access means herds must be kept and fed for additional weeks, driving up feed and labor costs while tying up capital. Some feedlots and packing plants have scaled back operations to prevent costly oversupply. In the grain sector, delays disrupt sales cycles and weaken Nebraska's ability to compete with faster-moving exporters. The combined pressure on both industries is squeezing margins across the state, turning a long-standing trade advantage into a logistical and financial challenge that Nebraska's rural economy can't afford to ignore. Number 2. North Dakota. North Dakota is a major producer of wheat, soybeans, and processed grain products, with much of its output traditionally flowing across the border into Canada. Its proximity has always been a competitive advantage, allowing for quicker delivery times and lower transportation costs compared to other U.S. states. But under the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, that advantage is being eroded, especially for small and mid-sized farms. These operations often lack the dedicated administrative staff needed to manage the complex compliance process. Every shipment now requires meticulous documentation on seed origin, pesticide use, and handling practices, along with potential lab testing before approval. When paperwork is incomplete or results are delayed, shipments are held up at border crossings, causing storage facilities to reach capacity. Once elevators and warehouses are full, farmers face a tough choice: pay for costly overflow storage or sell grain at discounted prices just to clear space. The slowdown doesn't just hit farmers' bottom lines. Processing plants, trucking companies, and local service providers also feel the pinch as volumes decline. In border towns that rely heavily on cross-border trade, reduced activity means lower retail sales, fewer service jobs, and weaker local tax revenues. For North Dakota's small farms, the combination of tighter rules and limited resources is more than a paperwork problem. It's a threat to their survival and to the economic heartbeat of the communities around them. Number 1. South Dakota. South Dakota's agricultural economy thrives on a balanced mix of livestock and grain production, with beef, corn, and wheat forming the backbone of its exports. Canada has long been one of its most important trade partners, buying both premium beef cuts and bulk grain shipments year after year. Now, both sides of that portfolio are under simultaneous pressure from the Safe Food for Canadians regulations. Beef exports must clear strict quarantine requirements and provide full traceability from ranch to processing plant to exporter. Grain shipments face equally rigorous demands for documentation on seed origin, pesticide use, and storage practices before crossing the border. These rules add costs, slow delivery times, and increase the risk of delays at inspection points. When shipments are held up, feedlots become overcrowded, and grain silos fill to capacity. The result is falling local prices, forcing producers to sell at reduced rates that often dip below break-even. Many farmers are already making difficult decisions, scaling back herd sizes, planting fewer acres, and delaying investments in equipment or infrastructure. This retrenchment affects not only producers, but also processors, transport companies, and rural businesses that depend on steady trade. If these conditions persist, South Dakota could see its role in the U.S.-Canada agricultural supply chain diminish, losing a hard-earned position built over decades of reliable exports. Fallout and scenarios, impacts and 3 possible outcomes. Across all 7 states, the pattern is clear. The first choke point is a backlog of documentation and lab testing. Export paperwork, safety certificates, and traceability records are piling up, with some shipments facing multiple rounds of verification before approval. Second, transportation networks are running below capacity. Truck fleets, rail operators, and loading terminals sit idle as delayed goods fail to fill schedules, driving up per-trip operating costs. Third, contract performance is taking a hit. Late deliveries and inconsistent supply have triggered penalty clauses, and in some cases, outright cancellations by Canadian buyers. Looking ahead 90 days, there are 3 potential scenarios. Easing. New coordination or faster inspections reduce clearance times, restoring smoother trade flows. Baseline. The current slow squeeze continues, keeping prices soft and margins tight without a full collapse. Tightening. Regulatory enforcement or unresolved disputes, like USMCA dairy TRQs, further restrict access, hitting Midwestern states even harder. Which path unfolds will depend on both political negotiations and the ability of producers to adapt quickly to these new trade realities. In the coming weeks, 3 watch points will shape how this story develops. First, any new updates from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, especially changes to inspection protocols or documentation standards under the SFCR. Second, monthly export data from the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service and its Global Agricultural Trade System, which will reveal whether shipments to Canada are recovering or slipping further. Third, the U.S. Trade Representative's next steps on the USMCA dairy tariff rate quota dispute, a potential flashpoint for Wisconsin and other dairy-heavy states. On the action side, there are practical steps to reduce risk. Standardizing traceability and safety documentation across the supply chain can cut down on errors that trigger costly delays. Negotiating pre-clearance agreements with Canadian partners would allow shipments to be certified before they reach the border. Diversifying export destinations in Europe, Asia, or even other North American markets can help offset lost sales. And forming a Midwest alliance of affected states could strengthen lobbying efforts for both short-term relief and long-term trade stability. If you've experienced these disruptions or found ways to work around them, share your story in the comments. Your insight might help shape the solutions ahead.